Welcome to the Podium Pod, the Pick and Roll's national basketball podcast as we begin the road to Paris 2024. I'm Adam Webster, and I'm joined today by Pick and Roll feature writer Jacob Dool, my old friend from Tassie. Jacob, we saw a game against Serbia. The Boomers had a victory last night. There's plenty to get to, plenty to talk about from that game. Firstly, welcome to the show. And secondly, a really interesting performance against Serbia and a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I think, as you say, there's a lot to sort of dissect from that game. Good to see the Boomers get a win after just falling short against Team USA. And I think even more positive was seeing some of the things that worked well against the United States sort of translate over to a very different opponent in Serbia. So I think some positive signs, as you mentioned, and plenty to look forward to and break down now.
There's one man that we have to talk about off the top, Patty Mills. We've spoken about him a lot in the episodes of the show so far this FIBA season. We've expressed a fair bit of concern about his shot. And then he just busts out a 28.5 assist contest. He's 3 of 6 on twos, 4 of 7 on threes, and 10 of 11 from the free throw line. Jacob, instant reactions to Patty Mills and his performance against Serbia overnight.
Well, first of all, I hope you followed through with my request from last night's episode, where after mentioning in passing that maybe the Boomers might consider moving Patty Mills to the bench, I said if he comes out and has a big game, could we delete the tape? So I hope you've done that, first of all, and done me a favour and saved me.
It's everywhere, mate. It's everywhere now. We can't possibly get rid of it. But, I mean, the Moz and the reverse Moz is real. If you could just go on a tear saying that we'll never win a medal again, then that'd be great from here.
Yep, happy to. I'll be on Twitter from now until the end of the Paris Olympics, just shouting from the rooftops that the Boomers are done, and hopefully that'll get us over the line.
I want to talk about the way that Patty got going. I mean, he hit those 2 shots early in the contest and seemed to find his footing from there. And that's the thing that's, I guess, been lacking in his games, in the warm-up games so far. He's a player that, builds on momentum and plays with a great deal of momentum. So when he's able to get his shot off early and see it hit the bottom of the net, good luck from there. And he's always been like that. He's been streaky at times, particularly later in his career. And that's obviously how he got that 40 points in the bronze medal match. We've seen him sort of drag Australia out of the mud time and time again. But usually it starts with a couple of early shots, and he got those early on. 4 of 7 from the three-point line is not efficiency that we've seen from Patty in a Boomers uniform in quite some time. So it has to be encouraging for Brian Goorjian and staff to see the guy that's dragged them to a bronze medal finally hitting some shots consistently.
Yeah, and I think they would certainly be hoping that this is a real turning point. And I think it could be, because it's a bit of a cliche, but as they always say, shooters need rhythm. They need consistency. They need to see the ball go in the basket sometimes. And for Patty Mills, he's coming off not just one NBA season, but 2 NBA seasons where he really hasn't played much. He's played less than 1,000 minutes total over the last 2 NBA seasons. He hasn't had that consistency in actual game reps. So yes, he's been hunting his shot really aggressively in the first few warm-up games, and it hasn't looked good. It's been pretty ugly at times. But maybe that was a necessary evil to shake off some of the rust that he might have brought into training camp after a really disrupted NBA campaign. And now we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. I think he was still really aggressive in looking for a shot. It was maybe a little bit more under control than in that previous game against the US, which is a positive. But obviously there's going to be ups and downs still from here. It's not just an overnight fix, but I think it was really positive to just see the ball go down a few times and see him start to find that rhythm again, because Australia needs him making shots if they really want to compete in this tournament.
It's really encouraging, and I mean, we have to call out the Serbian defense as well. It was a warm-up game for them. They were missing Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's been a key player, a key cog in their ability to go deep in these international tournaments. But we have to call out their defense. They were making some terrible fouls. You never foul a jump shooter, and they fouled Patty like 4 times when he was trying to hit a jump shot. Terrible mistakes. You have to put that down to a little bit of the fact that it was a warm-up game, a little bit of the fact that there was nothing necessarily on the line aside from reps and, trying to build that team chemistry, which is probably a little bit more important for this Boomers side than this Serbian side, who went deep in the World Cup last year and have pretty much just added Nikola Jokic on top of that team. And, when you're adding the best player in the world, he kind of fits in seamlessly anyway. So it was some really bad defense from Serbia on Paddy to continue to get him going, continue to keep him confident.
And some of that might be the reputation that Paddy Mills has in the international game. He's kind of become, not just in Australia, but globally, this mythical figure, FIBA Paddy, Boomers Paddy. So even when he is down on form, he has this sort of gravitational pull about
Yeah.
him because teams are so worried about him. And that might play into, that really overzealous defense on the ball and committing fouls and shooting fouls. But you're right, it really helped him, I think, to find that rhythm and make some shots from the free throw line. And I think we all just have to keep our fingers crossed that maybe a few more teams are going to defend him that way, because it'll certainly make life a bit easier if he can, get to the free throw line shooting from behind the arc.
We'll get to some of the other players in a moment. But first off, the Podium Pod, proudly brought to you by Team Feet. Team Feet offers premium athletic socks for modern teams, however they compete, with sweat wicking cotton, arch support, ventilation panels, and compression stitching. Team Feet socks are built to outperform. Whether your team is tiny or 1,000 strong, Team Feet unites and excites your players and supporters with their combination of quality and performance. Join basketball teams around Australia and the world by choosing Team Feet. For designs and worldwide delivery, head to teamfeet.com. We really appreciate Team Feet's support of the Podium Pod all season long as we move through the Boomers warm-up games, the Opals warm-up games, and then, of course, Paris 2024 is going to be massive, and the potential medals that we could win across basketball competitions is very significant. Jacob, I want to turn to some other players who had strong outings in this contest against Serbia. We had Dante Exum in double figures, 15 points, 7 boards, 4 assists. Josh Giddey had 13 points, 6 rebounds, 6 turnovers, but that's seemingly sort of par for the course for Josh in FIBA play at this point, because he's asked to do so much and facilitate so much that, we don't necessarily see those turnover numbers decreasing if he's going to have the ball in his hands this much, although there are a couple of silly passes in there that he might be able to take out of his game by the time Paris rolls along.
Yeah, and Josh Giddey's another one who has a little bit of rust to shake off, isn't he? Yes, he played more than Paddy Mills, or a lot more than that in the NBA season, but he saw his role really decrease with the Oklahoma City Thunder. He didn't have the ball in his hands, wasn't making those plays off the dribble. So it's obviously going to take some time for him to readjust as well to being that main guy offensively and creating for himself and others. I think for the most part, he's done a really good job in these games, getting to the spots he wants. But there are some of those passes, as you say, that can be tidied up, some shots around the basket that he can do a better job of converting. He struggled a little bit from close range at times, but on the whole, I think the way that he was able to get to where he wanted to go to and then make decisions from there, I think was really promising. And I think it's something that the Boomers can build on here.
It was a really chippy game at different points, Jacob, and we want to talk about Jock Landale. We spoke about him last night, his really strong play against Team USA. We have to talk about him again this evening because 5 points, 4 rebounds, 3 fouls. Got a technical foul called against him at one point there, and just struggled to keep his cool against a Serbian team that a little bit different to the US. We spoke about the difference between playing the US team and playing the Serbians is that you're going to be in a bit more of a rock fight. You're going to be dragged into a lot more of a slow game, and reflected in the scores. Both teams well into the 90s in the USA-Australia game yesterday. The winning score was 84 points in this one, so it just speaks to the ability of the Serbians to kind of slow things down, play at their own pace, and for them, they took great pleasure in making Australia earn it, and also making sure that every single foul was accentuated as much as humanly possible, which is kind of what you'd expect from those Euro teams. They know how to draw the whistle.
They do, and but I think on the other side, the Boomers did do a pretty good job of trying to get the game on their terms, and that resulted in, as you say, there was some chippiness in the game. Some of the hard fouls from Serbia on Boomers players. It felt like Australia was getting out and running and sort of getting ahead of the defense, and Serbia were forced to just throw an arm across or drop the shoulder just to slow the play down and bring it back to that sort of more methodical style that they want to play. So on the most part, I think the Boomers kind of got what they wanted. It wasn't quite the helter-skelter end-to-end that it was against Team USA that resulted in that really high-scoring game. But I think they would have to be happy with the way that they were able to, get stops first of all. They forced Serbia to miss a lot of shots and force another 15 turnovers, and then quickly get the ball up the court, either for an easy basket or just to put some pressure on the defense early in the shot clock in the half court.
I think you also have to look at the group games that Australia is going to come up against: Canada, Greece, and Spain. They're not going to come up against a guy with a gravitational pull of Nikola Jokic. They're not necessarily going to come up against a guy with the sheer size and mass of Nikola Milutinov, because those teams play much smaller, much sleeker. You've got Canada with Dwight Powell as their big man, and then Kelly Olynyk off the bench. You've got Spain with Aldama, as well as Hernan Gomez as big man. You've got Greece, obviously, with the Antetokounmpo brothers that are there as well. They don't necessarily have the girth that Jokic and Milutinov have for Serbia, and I think Magnay and Landale really struggled with that size and with the ability of those players to get pretty much wherever they wanted on the court, particularly on the O boards and under the basket, and that caused obviously quite a few fouls. And easy passes, particularly for Jokic, which, is his game. He had 3 assists. Felt like it could have been a few more. His teammates missed a few bunnies under the rim. But for Landale, for Magnay, it's a completely different look to what they'll face in the group phase of the Paris tournament.
It is. And I think both of these warm-up games in Abu Dhabi are kind of unique matchups in their own way, aren't they? The US have quality across the board, but under the basket, especially with someone like Anthony Davis, and come up against Jokic, who is world class, best in the world, but in a completely different way, such a unique player in his own right. There's not many matchups like that in world basketball, and so I think for Magnay and Landale, it was a good time to come up against players like that because it's a time to learn and observe and make mistakes, and then they can take those learnings into maybe a knockout phase matchup, coming out of a group stage, hopefully where things are a little bit more normal, more reasonable matchups for them. So I think they battled hard. There were moments where I thought Will Magnay in particular battled really well against Nikola Jokic and didn't let him get to his spot under the basket. Still plenty to tidy up, as you say, but I think that also sort of shines a light on why it's nice to have the 3 centers there, because if one of them is struggling, fouling, or just not able to get to the right spots defensively, you do have some options there to shuffle through.
Let's talk about the rotation, because it was very consistent in the 2 games in Abu Dhabi against US and now against Serbia. And conspicuous by his absence was Duop Reith. Damien, thank you for that comment. I don't know what's going on with Duop Reith. The only thing that I can think of is that, we spoke about it pre-show, Jacob. It appears like Brian Goorjian has a certain way that he wants to play. He wants to have that, physical presence down low in Jock Landale or Will Magnay. He wants to have that stretch player at power forward and potentially 3 guards, or Josh Green and 2 guards as the rest of the rotation. He wants either Jack McVeigh or Nick Kay at power forward, and then he wants to go smaller across the rest of the lineup. That appears to be the ongoing makeup of this team on the floor, which then means that Duop Reith is the odd man out. Now, looking forward to those group games, you don't necessarily have a team with multiple big men that would justify playing Duop at the 4. And if you're set on Landale and Magnay as your center rotation, Duop's the odd man out, which is a little weird because of how strong his play was for Portland, how he was able to stretch the floor for the Blazers this season, and the fact that, we've spoken about this team sort of missing out on a bit of shooting and looking for its big men to take more 3-point shots. Well, Duop's that sort of guy, but he just doesn't tend to play the same way that Gorge wants to play.
Yeah, and I think you're right that the shooting would be a massive bonus in this team, but it seems like Brian Goorjian's really prioritizing the defensive end, particularly at that 5 spot. And so that's where Reith comes unstuck a bit. He's not quite as mobile, doesn't quite have the instincts of a Landale or a Magnay. And so I kind of see where he is at the end of the rotation now, kind of similarly to the situation with Matisse Thybulle in the selection of this squad. You know, Thybulle clearly is in the 12 most talented players that were in that extended squad, but he didn't quite fit the exact makeup, rightly or wrongly, of what Brian Goorjian wanted to do, and so he missed out. I think similarly, Duop Reith, it's pretty easy to say that he is in the 9 most talented players on this Boomers roster. But if it doesn't stylistically work, if it doesn't quite fit with what Brian Goorjian wants and what the rest of his rotation looks like, you're not necessarily just going to play your 9 best guys. You're going to pick the ones that fit what you want to do. And I think Will Magnay really is just a perfect player for Brian Goorjian. You know, he battles hard, he protects the rim, he's mobile for a big man, and he's a lob target around the basket and a finisher. So for what they're trying to do, the defensive focus that they have and the really heavy switching and blitzing defense that they want to play, he's just a much better fit. I don't think that's a slight on Duop Reith as a player or the skills that he has. And I think those skills could be useful in certain matchups and moments. But I think that's where it's really coming from, the fact that he's barely played in these games and that he may be towards the end of that bench.
Shout out to Ryan for a couple of comments here as we're live on YouTube as well, if you're listening to the podcast version of this. Firstly, Ryan, the alternative of Giddey not having the ball in his hands is what? That's fair. As we said, I think the 6 turnovers are kind of par for the course because Josh Giddey has to have his hands on the ball almost at all times when he's on the floor. And regarding Reith being a stretch 4, yes, that's, I think, a true statement. The problem is that he's used to playing those big man roles, and we're not playing against enough people or enough teams that have sort of 2 genuine big men out there. There's more teams that are playing a little bit smaller, and that's where Nick Kay and Jack McVeigh are being used, both to be a little bit more nimble on the perimeter, but also to stretch the floor and be a bit quicker potentially than Duop Reith up and down the floor as well. So it's an ongoing thing that we're going to have to counter in this Boomers conversation. As you said, it started with Matisse Thybulle's non-selection for this squad, and it's going to continue with Duop Reith not getting any minutes after being such a revelation for the Blazers and earning himself a full NBA contract this offseason. It's going to be a lot of fans out there looking at that and looking his production saying, why is a guy like Nick Kay that played in Japan the last few years, albeit a bronze medalist, why is a guy like Jack McVeigh that's been in the NBL the last few seasons and is about to embark on his NBA journey, why are they getting minutes over a guy that was playing rotation minutes for an NBA team, albeit a lottery team this past season? But to your point, it's just fit. At the end of the day, Brian Goorjian has a very, very clear idea of the way that he wants to play. And he's not afraid to bench guys. He's not afraid to not pick a guy like Xavier Cooks, who he's going to be coaching for the next 3 seasons on the Sydney Kings. So if that tells you anything about Brian Goorjian's mindset, no one is safe. If they do not fit how he believes he's going to win, and he had a quote a couple of days ago about, I'm just trying to find a way to convince these guys, to show these guys how we're going to win. And it's clear that he doesn't necessarily see Duop Reith's play and his style as a part of those plans.
Yeah, and I think that all feeds into what Goorjian made very clear following on from the World Cup and in the lead up to this tournament, is that you can't just pick the best team. He was going to look really hard for the things that fit the overall roster and what he wants to do. And he's made those calls. They've been tough calls at times. And I think Reith not playing is another tough call, but defensively, he doesn't do what they want at the 5. And yes, he could play as that stretch 4, but he's not as good defensively or as mobile as Kay, and he doesn't offer as much versatility offensively as a Jack McVeigh. So it's just one of those things where he doesn't quite fit, but at the same time, he's going to have to stay ready, because I think there are going to be moments where his shooting will really come to the fore and he could still be a really important player in this tournament. Or if there's an injury, if there's foul trouble, he's suddenly playing 20 minutes in a big game. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with the position that he's in, but also how the team uses him moving forward.
Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the next couple of games that are apparently being played by this Boomers team. Now, when you hear the podcast version of this come out on Thursday morning, we're talking about games potentially on Friday morning and Sunday morning Australian time. where the Boomers are supposed to, according to FIBA, according to the France Basketball Federation, according to the Puerto Rican Basketball Federation, supposed to play 2 final warm-up games in France ahead of Paris 2024. The first against Puerto Rico, who qualified recently in the Olympic qualifying tournament, and then against France, the host nation, their final official warm-up games prior to the start of the Olympics. The thing that I don't understand, Jacob, is we've heard nothing about this, despite it being confirmed by FIBA, despite it being confirmed by France and Puerto Rico as games that they're going to be playing over the next few days. We haven't heard anything official right now. So are these phantom games? Are they going to be, I don't know if they're going to be televised. I don't know if we're going to be able to see what the results of these games are. But it is fairly conspicuous by the absence of promotion here in terms of the last 2 games before the Boomers play. Now, it is good, though, that the Boomers are getting 2 more looks at bona fide Olympic qualified teams ahead of this Paris Olympics, because what we said last week or a couple of weeks ago was that the preparation games against China were not necessarily indicative of what we'd be facing in Paris. So the good part of this is they're playing 2 more teams that are going to Paris. The opportunity is the fact that no one knows it's happening.
It's interesting, isn't it? I'm not quite sure why it's been so much kept on the down low. They're 2 good games that I think everyone would like to watch, if possible. So, if anyone at Basketball Australia or KO or whoever it is wants to do us a favor and let us know if those games will be available, I would appreciate that. That'd be a good start. But purely from the on-court perspective, I think they're 2 really good games as tune-ups. You look at Puerto Rico, who, as you say, have qualified for the Olympics. They're already sort of in do-or-die mode from that Olympic qualifying tournament, led by a couple of really good guards in Jose Alvarado and Tremont Waters. So that's one challenge. And then you switch to France, who obviously have talent across the board, but led by Rudy Gobert and Victor Wembanyama down low. I think that's...
Don't forget FIBA Fournier. Don't forget FIBA Fournier.
True. So there's just a lot to worry about there too. It's 2 really unique matchups again that I think will be a good test. And that's what you want in these warm-up games, is to test yourself against different opposition. Yeah. So yeah, I think they're great games to be playing. As you say, the next step now is to figure out how on earth we're going to watch them.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see Puerto Rico. A Jose Alvarado-led team is interesting, because obviously the hallmark of particularly international teams is they tend to take on the personality and the structure of their best player. So for Puerto Rico, I'm expecting a gritty, defensive, frantic team. And that's going to be a completely different look for the Boomers. And it's almost going to be like looking in a mirror at different points in time, because that's the way they played against Team USA. For France, they have those 2 all-world big men that at FIBA level are going to be even more potent. So do we see Duop Reith out there if you have Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert at the same time? I wouldn't mind seeing that if I'm Brian Goorjian, because if you run into France in the knockout rounds, if you manage to get to the quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, and you come up against those Twin Towers, I'm not necessarily too happy with Nick Kay or Jack McVeigh on Victor Wembanyama. I'm a little concerned.
Well, and at the other end as well, if you have Victor Wembanyama or Gobert, either of them playing at the 5 and being able to, in FIBA play, just hang around the basket and protect the rim, that's going to make it really tough for anyone to get anything going. So if you can have Reith to sort of pull them away from the basket a bit, that's where he could come into play potentially. That's one of those matchups where he could be really useful. So to be able to get a look at that ahead of the World Cup and ahead of, fingers crossed, a knockout rounds matchup against France, I think it'll be really interesting to see how that works and how much they look at it and what else might be on the cards.
Well, if those two games happen, then we will bring them to you on the Podium Pod. We will talk about them. We'll break them down. We will try and get grainy footage on VHS somewhere if they're not televised, but we will do our level best to cover all of the warm-up games regardless of where they're played and how they are watched. For Jacob Dool, I'm Adam Webster. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time.